village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me." But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her."
All right. So I told Dave earlier this week that I would be talking about discipleship because I didn't really know how else, to take that passage other than, words that I've heard preached on it before. But as God usually does, He transforms our thinking. And, I better take some of this. He's transformed my thinking when it came to that passage. So I will not be talking about discipleship today. I will be talking about how Christ transforms the expectations we have for our lives and how He transforms the norms that we have in our culture. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tiffany Lougheed. I've been part of the congregation of Northview since 2007, and throughout these past 11 years, I guess, God has been slowly but surely pushing me out of my comfort zone and into greater roles of leadership here at Northview. I started leading worship on stage. I'd been participating in worship, but I started leading in, I think, 2015 maybe. And I didn't, if you heard my first sermon that I preached in August, I mentioned that I didn't feel equipped to do it. I didn't think I was a good enough musician. I didn't really think I was ready, but God has a way of pushing us into, or gently nudging us into things that we may not feel we're ready for. But He doesn't He doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. And I mentioned that in the sermon that I preached in August. And so that sermon that I preached in August was the very first time that I ever preached. And again, I did not feel ready. I still don't feel ready, but I trust that God is using me in this way. And I trust that God has a word for you guys today, you men and women. So with that, I'd like to get started. So I want to talk a little bit about cultural expectations on women. As this is a series about women, what I'm going to say is mostly focused on women, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a word for men in here as well. So expectations that I feel like have been placed on me throughout my life, I'll list a few. As a woman in this culture, I feel like I'm expected to be physically beautiful and attractive. I feel like I'm expected to be independent. I feel like I'm expected to be successful in my career. I feel like I'm expected to be a good caregiver for my family. I feel like I'm expected to be smart, healthy and fit, organized, nice to people, and socially active, I guess. But at the same time, I also feel like there are some other things that I'm expected not to be or not to do. I feel like I'm expected not to spend too much time making myself beautiful or attractive, but I also don't want to be unattractive. I'm expected not to be too independent, lest I look like a radical feminist. I feel like I'm not supposed to be so successful in my career that I neglect my responsibilities at home. I feel like I'm supposed to not be that smart that people think I'm a know-it-all. I think, and feel that I'm not supposed to be so physically fit that I intimidate other men. I feel like I'm not supposed to be so organized that people think I'm OCD. I feel like I'm not supposed to be so nice that people think I'm a pushover. And I feel like I'm not supposed to be so socially active that people just think I'm seeking validation from others. Do you kind of see how there's a double standard there? A double standard for women? Not to say that there aren't double standards in our culture for men either, but again, what I'm going to be focusing on is mostly around women. And with that in mind, I want to take a look at globally what's happening with women around the world. So the World Health Organization has some statistics on sexual violence that were published in 2017, and I'm going to read a few of them. 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced sexual violence. As many as 38% of murders of women are committed by a male intimate partner. The United Nations defines violence against women as an act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or mental harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. With that definition of what it means to have sexual violence or sexual harassment, I feel like most women in this room can agree that we have experienced sexual violence or harassment in our lives. How many of us women have been catcalled in public or have received unwanted sexual passes from men, aka being hit on? In Canada, you may have heard about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was formed in 2008. Part of what their findings have done have allowed the government of Canada to initiate, in September of 2016, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls here in Canada. And I'm going to read an excerpt from the interim report in November of this past year. No one knows for sure how many Indigenous women and girls have been murdered or gone missing in Canada. The Native Women's Association of Canada created a database tracking these cases in 2005, and its 2010 report was the first to put a number to the missing and murdered, 582. As part of her 2013 doctoral thesis, Dr. Marianne Pierce created a database that identified 824 missing or murdered Indigenous women between 1946 and 2013. That number grew to almost 1,200 between 1980 and 2012, with the RCMP's 2014 national overview. However, how police services identify who is Indigenous, who is murdered and missing, is not the same across Canada because difficulties with the data behind the statistics, the definitions and identification, and errors in reporting, the real number of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is likely much higher. But even with these concerns, the general consensus is that the numbers are staggering. These numbers are even more devastating when we consider that Indigenous women and girls make up only 4% of the female population in Canada. And then I want to turn our eyes to what's happening in America right now. You may have heard about the #MeToo movement that has been very popular recently. Well, in October of this past year, 2017, actress Alyssa Milano revived that movement when she posted with the #MeToo on Twitter. Within 24 hours of her first tweet, over 12 million posts and comments were made on social media platforms, and over 45% of all US social media users had friends who posted with the #MeToo. Whoever posted with the #MeToo was declaring that that person had experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. Over 12 million posts in the first 24 hours. Those numbers are staggering. Rewind exactly 1 year before this, in October of 2016, when an Access Hollywood tape was brought to light during the presidential election. It revealed that the soon-to-be elected president of the United States, Donald Trump, wasn't a man who just made a pass on a woman, but, to quote, moved on her like a blank, insert another word for a female dog. And he didn't just inappropriately touch women, but he could, quote, grab them by the blank, insert another word for a cat. And if we turn our attention to the rest of the world at large, we still see countries where women are just now having the ability to drive, where women are still struggling to receive education, and where in some cultures it is still considered dishonorable if you only have daughters and not sons. In light of this global context, what does God say about women? So with our passage, in Mary and Martha's context, I want to take a look at what it was like to be a woman in first century. And I found a really awesome sermon on the Free Methodist Church in Canada's website around the same topic as what I'm going to be talking about today. And it's a sermon called Jesus Transforms Cultural Norms. And it's written by Pastor Hilka Avasomi. I am so sorry if I did not pronounce that right, but she's from Brampton Free Methodist Church. And I just want to read a little excerpt from her sermon. So when it came to Jewish women in the first century, Jewish historian Josephus wrote that a woman is in all things inferior to the man. One of the regular prayers of Jewish men was, "Blessed are you, King of the universe, for not having made me a Gentile, a slave, or a woman." Jewish wisdom literature said that he that talks much with womankind brings evil upon himself and neglects the study of the law, and at last will inherit Gehenna, or hell. Women were regarded as private property. They were to be seen in public as little as possible. And it was considered shameful for a Jewish man to speak to a woman in public. Synagogue worship was segregated, and there was a separate temple court for women. Jewish women were barred from public speaking and could not receive an education. I also want to take a look at the context of rabbis, because sitting at the feet of Jesus in this passage is huge, and I don't think we fully understand how important it is. You see, rabbis in the first century would only select a chosen few to be their disciples, to say, "Come and follow me." Those chosen few had to be very intellectual. They had to show a lot of promise when it came to learning the scriptures and interpreting them. They could only be men, as only men could receive an education. Well, the fact that Mary was allowed to sit at the feet of Jesus totally transformed that cultural norm. She was allowed to sit in the company of not just men, but of a rabbi. To me, this is an indication that Jesus shows that women and men are equals, allowed the same opportunity to learn, allowed the same opportunity to contribute in the church, allowed the same opportunity to not be seen as objects for men, but as intellectual equals. Jesus transformed a lot of cultural norms in that day. You may have heard of the teaching of the first shall be last and the last shall be first, or turning the other cheek, or that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus taught us to love our enemies. Jesus taught us that children who have more faith, who don't rely on their intellect or their capability, that those will enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus also taught us that those who are without sin shall cast the first stone. You see, Jesus, his treatment of women throughout the scriptures, as Carol talked about last Sunday, shows us that he treated women with such dignity and respect. The fact that he saved an adulteress from being stoned to death. The fact that he talked to a Samaritan woman at the well, a woman who was a half-breed, a culture that Jews were not supposed to interact with, let alone women. The fact that Jesus allowed a prostitute to wash his feet, an act of great worship. The fact that Jesus allowed Mary to sit at his feet, to be an equal, and to learn from him. In light of the way Christ treated women, how do we respond to our culture's continual mistreatment of women? Some of the things I'm going to talk about now are probably pretty common sense for most of us growing up in the church, and I believe that there are great men in here, in this room, that show a lot of respect and dignity to women. But that's not necessarily the case out in our world. So I want to encourage you to really think about these things, even if they seem like common sense. Think before you speak or act. This one is for both men and women. Don't make light of situations that you experience or witness where a woman is being mistreated. Step in when you see someone being mistreated. Christ did not sit on the sidelines and watch as people were being mistreated. He intervened and helped the helpless. That was his whole ministry. Be aware of the words that you choose to describe women. An interesting saying when I was a kid was, "You throw like a girl," or "You run like a girl." That's not an okay way to describe women. In fact, that saying was meant to degrade women. It's saying that women lack the capability that men have. And it wasn't just for sports. We see that in intellect and in so many other areas of life. Don't be lewd toward women. I'm sure that one goes without saying here, but you'd be surprised how often women, are catcalled in public. And don't perpetuate cultural double standards. Don't rattle your wife or your daughter or whoever for taking too long to do her makeup in the morning. And definitely don't tell her that you think her friend is hotter than her, or that she could use more makeup. That is a double standard. Don't tell her that she needs to go to the gym, and don't make fun of women who are more physically fit than you. That is a double standard. And for women in violent situations, my encouragement to you is to seek help. Christ made you for so much more. He loves you so much. If you're in an abusive situation, I encourage you to seek a female confidant who can help you, someone you can trust and confide in. There are a number of resources available through the city, and I got Sean Brewster's help on this one. He suggested the YWCA. They have a lot of resources for women. Safety planning resources, domestic abuse hotline. I also encourage you, and Belinda allowed me to say her name, if you need a female confidant, someone you need to confide in, I trust Pastor Belinda with my whole heart. She is a kind, considerate, compassionate woman, and she lives to serve others. And I want to speak to men right now, too, fathers and husbands. Show your sons what it means to treat women with respect, dignity, and love by the way that you treat your wife and your daughters. Don't raise your voice. Don't be verbally abusive. Be kind and gentle. Be loving and compassionate. Be tender-hearted and merciful. Those seemingly female qualities are not just female. God our Father expresses those qualities God made both men and women. He embodies both of those characteristics. I believe that we need to raise a generation of men who turn cultural norms upside down, just as Christ did, not by domineering or overpowering, but by showing submissive love, Christ-like love, the love for the church, the way Amy touched on a few weeks ago. Finally, I want to thank my father-in-law, Steve Lougheed, for raising two sons who know how to be kind, who know how to be respectful, who know how to be compassionate and loving. Dylan has never once made me feel inferior to him. And he has never once made me feel unloved. And I want to thank my father, Steve Fitzpatrick, for raising me to be an independent woman who knows that I am loved, that I am valuable, that I am just as valuable as a man in our society. You see, Christ's upside-down kingdom welcomes all tribes, all tongues, all nations, all ages, all men, all women, all people, to sit at his feet and learn from the rabbi. We, the church, are the witnesses to his making things right in this world. So let's not forget to treat everyone with dignity and respect, and most of all, love. For we are nothing if our lives do not reflect Christ's love. The love that was so great that he was willing to die on the cross to redeem all of us equally. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I feel your love for us in this place. I feel you moving here, your spirit. I pray that your people feel it too. Your love for all people. For everyone to be treated with kindness and respect and dignity. For everyone to have the opportunity to sit at your feet and learn of your love. Learn of your reconciliation. And to go out and make disciples of all the nations. Both men and women, making disciples in your name, Jesus. Thank you for the way that this church has raised me up. I feel so encouraged by both the men and the women at Northview, Lord. And I know you have a great plan for each and every one of us, your people. So thank you for continuing to move in this place. Thank you for your honor and your glory displayed here, your power poured out. For yours is the kingdom, Lord Jesus, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.